seems to me that what you've given us is a very beautiful description of loving. I ask my students, I divide them into two groups, and I ask half of them to go off and come up with what it means to love a person, and the other group to go off and tell me what it is to love a place. And when they come back together again, they discover they've made two copies of the same list. And all the things that you're talking about, wanting to be a part of it, feeling lifted by it, feeling embraced by it, and feeling that one must, you can't mindlessly, tragically maybe even, you have to defend its well-being. All seem to me to be hallmarks of a loving relationship that we define as love. Even the things that you were talking about in terms of your misgivings about the power in it and the kind of abusive things that happen within the relationship seem to me to be characterized by that same relationship.
And the notions of imperfection are just really well stated. That's just so interesting to hear.
Nature's not always pretty and it's violent. And where does that lead you? Really, really helpful to listen to you frame it that way.
I think in relation to that, the other side, what caught me in your description, and it is partly about description being about love, where you said, you raised the question, what do you give back? And you try to do your best and you feel it's never enough. It seems to me that's important in relationship to that which is always larger than us. Because it keeps us in that place of being humble and having to try again. Instead of feeling like we have mastered something and tamed it and conquered it.
This is a good question. When you were a child and escaped to nature, what was that? Was it the backyard? Was it anywhere where the house wasn't? So it could have been the grocery store down the street. I mean, what in your recollection, what was it that you that
well,
was nature?
The rural landscape of southern Germany was vineyards, woods, meadows. I can't tell you how many cherry trees I visited. You know, and in the Black Forest, it would be endless woods. You know, walking in the creek, going down to the Rhine River. So
it's totally very much a rural setting then,
yeah,
rather than no urban elements to it that you call.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the sense of intimacy that you shared with us is, I think that is the case in different ways, but it's a common, I think one would find that among many. Mm-hmm. That nature, or what we're calling nature, in more than human field of beings that don't speak in words, is a necessary touchstone for us to function, to step back into a society that seems to be somewhat out of whack or maybe completely out of its gourd. But we have to function. We're a social species. We need the nourishment of community and relationships with our own kind. But these relationships are damn hard to navigate at this time in the world. And particularly confusing for folks of certain kinds of bent and certain kinds of sensitivities, nervous systems of a certain porous style. And if one can't step into that context, the many-voiced silence, the wordless, where one is nonetheless met by beings in that wordless place and engaged, then one has a sense one can't find oneself and remember who you are. And so the things you shared brought up many resonances in me, and I just want to, I want to thank you for that, and to ask, out of this, I guess the strongest puzzlement it touches in me is just a deep intuition that without experience in interspecies contact or intercorporeal contact with things that are not just human, my intuition is that humans can't possibly function and that our family structures and our societal structures become exceedingly brittle when nature is just seen and spoken of as a set of objects or as a set of resources. We're speaking in ways that frustrate or stifle or cut any eros, any of that spontaneous, erotic energy or intimate, carnal rapport that a child spontaneously finds with nature. And when that's cut, then the only place you can turn for that sense of nourishment with another has to be, well, the only place where there are things that can relate in a creative way, which is with other humans and other people. And so we turn toward our lovers, craving all of that wild otherness that the organism still knows it needs from a whole range of othernesses, from aspen trees and pines and boulders and lichen and hawks, clouds. And another human shaped so much like me can't possibly supply or provide all of that wild otherness. And it seems to make, therefore, our human relationships very brittle when we are cut off from that wider field of intimacies. And so I'm just wondering if that, if you follow that, if that resonates at all, if that makes any sense, that somehow the human, our interpersonal relationships become very, very brittle when we're just trading around all the eros among ourselves rather than feeling held and nested and supported by the ground.
It absolutely resonates with me. I guess I was careful in trying to project that onto everyone else because it's so much my experience that I didn't want to, the danger when you have this one personal experience is that you think it's everyone's. But I guess there's plenty of other people who have spoken to this, people who call us interbeings, Thich Nhat Hanh, or people who've written about Homo geographicus, that you are so intimately, you're only really defined as a human being in the places where you connect. And so I think there's, plenty of people who have spoken to this and who have described, one form of insanity is to be completely disconnected. And hence, dysfunctional relationships coming out of that. So I would say eco-psychology is probably the leading, voice in that from the psychological perspective. But I think many have, come to the same conclusion. So yeah, it resonates very much with me. Norm.
I want to thank you too. It was a really moving encounter and a lot of it I identified with. One of the things that wasn't there was, because that's so much of one's identity or can be, what do you do with when that part of your identity or when you see something you love that's being injured or because of other people's behavior, whether it's conscious or unconscious, affects that which is so important to you on a personal kind of level. What do you do with it? What does one do with that? Not me specifically.
Yeah, I think we should spread that question out because I think that's everyone.
It's what it does for me is sort of raises anger and frustration and the desire to teach people, to try to help them to sort of see things a little bit differently and to show that they're part of something that's just, this is a big flow, folks. And we're all part of it, and it's got all kinds of dimensions to it. But they're, they have sort of different views, they're seeing different things.
I can give you my very brief answer to this, and then maybe we should open that question up because I think it's a good one. For me, what I do with that is I go in one of two places. One is passion to do what I do. That's what feeds me. That's the deepest anchor of behind what I do. And the other one is despair. It's the flip side of, for me, of those two. So, opening up to anyone want to jump on what do you do with when someone hurts what you love most?
Well, this gets maybe out of it a different way, but David, you spoke when we were talking with Stephen about the power of narrative and language and speech and storytelling. And now, in this connection, we speak about not speaking and relating in some way that's nonverbal to other beings. And I think that's what I was trying to talk about in the sense of participation, interpenetration, interconnection. But I think the thing that connects it to this question is it's another kind of language. It's not a language that's verbal that we tell all speaking English or Swahili or whatever, but it's a different language. It's a language of nature that you won't, in a sense, you teach yourself. You taught it to yourself in your experiences in the Black Forest, and you can understand that language. And nature does not speak in the language that we're so accustomed to using that, in a sense, masks all that other sense of connection, of embodied and disembodied beings. But many people have those experiences of a moment of exchange with another living thing, or a moment of exchange even with mushrooms or fungi, whatever. So maybe that starts to get at what you're asking for, our connection to nature. It's multifaceted and many level, many story, very deep, and very non-verbal, but embodied.
Yes.
You know.
Just a tiny thing to link on there. And isn't there, for me, a link there is the language that we do speak when we're speaking is not just the dictionary definitions of the words, it's also the rhythm and the sound of the voice, da-da, da-da-da, da-da-da, which is what any other animal is hearing of our speaking. And that's that dimension in our even verbal language that exceeds the representational, the linguistic, that also affects the body. It's very bodily. And when I'm out in the woods, certainly I break into song often enough. But there's a sense, I have that, we're all also singing to each other in here, because there's the melody of our speaking, da-da-da-da, da-da-da. And so it's not just these dictionary definitions we're trading around even when we're speaking in words. It's singing.
I'd like to go back to Norm's question. It's an important question of what do you do? I think for me, there is a sense of sorrow and loss that you feel, anger. But I also sense that this is something that the acts that are creating the destruction are coming from a very dark, shadowy place. And it's incumbent upon me to ask, where is that coming from? To actually enter that dark place and explore the darkness and try to feel around, where is it coming from? That person who is coming from a certain place and their acts or decisions lead to a destruction. To try to get into that darkness and sense what's going
on. My intuitions on this stuff differ from David's, and I think, though I love the resonance that you two had, I think we should all be a little, well, I'm very worried about being too confident in an understanding of what it is to be an authentic human being. Because I'm very skeptical about essences about what humans are. And I think we have good reasons to be skeptical about essences of what humans are, which lead us to an understanding of why things are messed up or how we can make things better, right? Because the environmental community is not the first community to make an argument. like this. You know? I mean, we've had thousands of years of humans saying, if only you really understood the solidarity with your class, if only you really understood the essence of your gender, if only you really understood the importance of your nation, or your people, or your nationality, or your ethnicity, then if we could just sort of figure out a way of connecting you with that deep source, then we would be able to solve the problems that are presented in society as we see them now. And so I'm quite worried about environmentalism, or whatever you want to call it, that attaches itself so closely to an assumption of an analysis about what authentic human identity is. Because I think at the end of the day, even if we're right about it, and how we would know whether we're right, I have no idea, because we're just not going to live that long to find out. We end up dividing people in a pretty stark and severe way. And I see that a lot in the environmental movement today. You know, there are those enlightened environmentalists, we get it. We get our connection, you know, with the deep source. And then there are the people who are, you know, either distracted or deluded or been hoodwinked or they've been looking the wrong direction or whatever else. And those are the people on the other opposite side of the fence. And that doesn't seem to me to be the way to begin setting the groundwork for actually solving the environmental problems that are presented before us.
You know, it's Andrew. I agree with what you say about your wariness about essence, because in the name of essence, if we kill the other, then it doesn't share the essence that we have. But I do think that there are other ways outside of thinking where we do get a glimpse, and I use that word carefully, a glimpse of what it means to be a genuine human being. And we get it in these simple moments. So I'm thinking about moments of generosity between people, maybe amongst strangers, instances of hospitality, genuine acts of care for those who are wounded or hurt. And I'll tell you where this really impressed me. I am interested in what allows people to really feel into the other, rather than to think their way into the other. And I once had my graduate students run some examples, but after I had the experience, in emergency rooms in hospitals. You get all kinds of people in this situation. And in this situation, each of them comes in with their own suffering, and their own sorrow, and their own woundedness. But the most amazing thing happens there. Barriers break down, and compassion increases. To me, that's an instance of a glimpse, maybe, of what it means to be a genuine human being. I don't know how we build on that, because once you make it into an ideology, you run into an essence, and that's the danger, it seems to me, that something gets short-circuited between these moments of the heart, and when we put them up here in the head as an ideology. But I don't want to go too far in the direction, and I'm not saying that you're going there, of falling into a kind of nihilism.
No, it's not a nihilist or a relativist or a post something or other. You know, the older I get and the longer I do philosophy, I think that Aristotle just got it all right, you know, and we're sort of gradually just coming to admit that. And those virtues, right, which you find in Aristotle, and the importance of those, I completely agree. I don't think that's the essence of humanity, but I do think those represent the better angels of our nature, you know, without there being a human nature, but the best that we could be, you know, as a person. And I want to make strong arguments how we ought to try to do that. But what I'm worried about is any sort of claim that says, you know, Che Guevara had a list of socialist virtues that would be created, right, by the new socialist man, who was the person who got that authentic connection with their class interests. And I'm just worried when we sort of say, to get to that outcome, we've got to understand that where we really lost it was when we lost the following connection. I mean, I'm going to apologize for what I'm about to say, because I find it...
First say it and then apologize.
Because I've never once invoked this experience, because I think it's kind of appalling to try to do it, because it's so abused. But, you know, I live in Manhattan the last 6 years. Right? So, you know, in Greenwich Village, in my apartment, September 11th, the whole thing, all the aftermath. Most of my friends in the environmental community would say that most of my neighbors we're the most disconnected people from nature that you could possibly imagine. Or, having communication, or even taking seriously the notion of the non-speaking other voices. And that's where I saw those virtues, and how people came together, and friends that I have lived through similar tragedies in other parts of the world, that's where I saw it, and I hope to God it doesn't take a crisis or something like that to bring out the best in us. There's something we can do better than that, but I just think we need to be very, very, very careful about how we sort of map the road to those ends.
Yeah, I have the same concern that, I think we know that in our individual lives, when you fall into an illness, you make all kinds of promises at that moment. I'll be a better person, my life will change, I'll treat my dog better than I have in the past, and whatever the case may be. But I do think that somehow we have to develop what I call an ethics of sorrow, so that we don't wait for the next catastrophe to make us really feel again into the situation of the other.
I want to go back to why you said you would want to apologize for what you had said.
I abhor people who vote September 11th for any reason. I abhor the people who do it. I abhor the abuse of this event for the incredible ideological range for which it is abused, from across whatever spectrum you want to make. And so it's always, pained me deeply to even consider.
The exploitation.
Because it's sort of one of those things where, the appropriate response is silence.
Andrew, I think I deeply agree with you. I certainly didn't mean to be talking of essences, and didn't mean to be speaking of any prescription. But I did say that I think our human relationships and interpersonal relationships become very brittle.
When we're not connected with this thing. That's a causal claim.
When we're not connected with this thing.
What you call the more than human world.
But it seems to me, the reason I would call the more than human rather than nature, it seems to me it includes the human. The human is entirely in it and of it. And so one can find this deeply in our relations with one another too. But I don't want to say anything other than I have real problems with essentialism myself. I meant to be speaking personally.
So speaking personally, I'm not really an official observer today at this particular point, but I can't help myself finding that happening. And one of the things that we had talked about for this discussion was to try to share experiences as much as possible. And from Susie's talk and Steve's talk, that was an invitation in some regard to do that. And of course, they both have had time to prepare for that, whereas all of us perhaps have not. But in the back of my mind, I keep having this picture that when we end here, we're going to go outside and start talking about how beautiful it is out there and how wonderful it is to be here in Aspen and how we're affected by the environment in our dinner conversation. And so I am just struck by my curiosity about all of you who have come from different places very quickly. What happened to you? What's your immediate experience of traveling time zones, being in a different environment, perhaps than where you live? And how does that affect you at just an experiential level without necessarily a great deal of reflection, but just what's happened?
Let me just share a couple of images with you that we've collected over the years in our work, because I don't hear much spoken about the 4 billion people who, for them, nature does not exist. And it has long...
You mean in the way that we...
In the way that we've been talking. Nature just doesn't exist for these people. There is a community in Calcutta. This community of 850,000 people in 1 square mile. And in one little square block, we visited there was our fixer, a person who brought us in there, said, this is a great success story in this little square. And I'm looking around, and this was as bad as it gets. And I said, well, what is this great success? And he said that we raised enough money to build 3 private latrines. And I said, continue. And he said that until people can shit in private, they have no dignity and they have no sense of hope. We visited a Maasai farmer outside of Kenya, outside of Nairobi. And we had heard that the day before he had killed 2 lions. I said, oh my God, how can you kill these 2 lions when they're just beautiful animals? And he said, you know, you of the West have no concept of what it is like to live here. He said, those 2 lions, or it was 1 lion, I forget, 1 lion, killed 2 goats. And those 2 goats represented an education for my children, each of those goats, for 1 year. So you in the West, when you come here, you want to see the lions, you want to see all of this wonderful wildlife. And this is a particularly bright guy also. And he said, you know, you talk about carbon credit and marijuana. I said, wow, this is a Maasai warrior. And he's talking carbon credits. And he says, you know, somewhere along the line, you got to pay us so that we don't kill these lions. There was a place in Fortaleza, Brazil. And we were working with shaman. And they would go around and try to use their black magic to save young children. But in addition to that, they were taught about rehydration, which became black magic to them. And we went into a little hut, and we were going around the village, and there was a child that was probably a half an hour from death. And the shaman went over there and did all sorts of things, and there was lots of smoke and lots of rattling of stuff. And then there was rehydration, and you saw in front of your own eyes this child come back to life. And then we turned to the mother, and we asked, we were told that this mother would never cry, was not even crying as the child was dying. And so I said, why doesn't she cry? And she said that if she had cried, her tears would wet the wings of what surely would become an angel, and she couldn't fly to heaven. And these stories that we've seen all over the world, and they go on, we've been to the worst places in the world. And the sense of hopelessness is so pervasive that it's so easy for us to talk about our connection with nature in Aspen. But to go to Kibera in Nairobi, which is another 850,000 people a square mile, and malaria is running rampant because of climate change. Never used to be up there. And try to explain it's incomprehensible. So I don't know what it all means, what I just said, but there are 4 billion people that truly do, and we've seen it, live on this threshold of starvation. And, there was a village in Lake Victoria. What was the name? Kisumu. It is the malaria capital of the world, and 20% of all children will not reach the age of 5 because they will die of malaria. And it's all because, and they can't afford the medicine, and they can't afford the nets, and these things are trifles. So when we talk about the connection of nature, I'll tell you, these people are really out there in nature, but they never see nature. And it's very...
What is this that you're describing, if not nature? But isn't it,
Well-
I mean, Jeff spoke of wanting to go into the dark. And Bob Romanishin spoke of the grief and needing to dwell and visit it and come to a way of thinking out of that grief. And then I'm hearing what you're saying, brother, and it sounds so much. I mean, what's somehow happening in here is this speaking of these aspects of nature that we leave out entirely if we think nature is what we see in Aspen. But nature is malaria. Nature is the Lyme disease that I've had for 14 years. Nature is the shit that, isn't that ultimately nature is that?
I don't think it's been the definition that's been shared. I keep hearing nature defined by beauty, by the wind rustling through the aspen trees and create songs and dance and images and dreams. That's the nature that I'm hearing, and that's just not the nature that we're seeing.
But you talked about the fact that when you have the possibility of going out in nature, you find that human relations get brittle. But
No, when I can't get out in it,
okay,
I get very confused.
but you're not saying that humans in general.
Then I made a general statement. Yes,
Okay.
it was a causal statement, but it wasn't just a hunch, and I was asking, does this make sense?
I don't think it does if you consider that by the year 2010 or whatever, they say over 50% of people will live in megacities of over 10 million. And the people in Shanghai and in Calcutta and in Mexico City and other places that never get out of these cities, are their relationships brittle because of that?
But why is there this assumption that nature is only the forest, and that nature is not gravity, that nature is not the air we're breathing, whether we're living in Calcutta or in the middle of Mexico City, that nature is not, the muck in the air that I'm breathing, that I'm choking on.
I think then the definition of nature has to be, we have a Western view of nature and it doesn't quite fit the model of...
Agreed. That's why I'm less comfortable with the term nature. But when I speak of what I mean by the more than human is something that includes us humans, but it's not just us. And surely that's at work right in the middle of those settlements that you're speaking of, in those shanty towns. And it's as human as one's interactions are, one is still under the influence of many other than human agencies, like malaria, like water, like the storm clouds, who I would believe still are affecting the dreams.
I think something's being spoken here that we should not lose sight of. Whichever side of the argument you come down on, when you're bringing into the picture, is that there has been an unspoken assumption at work that what moves us in nature is beauty. And I think that that's something we have to really be aware of, because a corollary of that is the romantic fallacy that nature can save us. And I think that's the height of hubris. Given what we've done to nature, and then to turn around and say to the victim, save us from the plight that we've induced, that to me is still smacking of a kind of egocentrism. So I think we have to be aware of the tendency to romanticize our relationship to nature.
I'd love to sort of remind us, and I don't know, I haven't read the literature, but how much it's been maybe debated or taken apart. But if you think of Maslow's pyramid of needs, there are lots of different needs humans have, and one of them begins with just the basic food requirements that we need to have met, and that is one sort of way of relating to nature. That's something they need, whether or not they ever describe it in the sort of Western middle class, whatever terms, is one thing. What I described was something that has much more to do with my sense of security and safety and whatever. That's another one of those needs, right? Self-actualization. We haven't gotten to that place, but it's like there's numerous ways in which that can be the basis of the relationship to nature, and I think they're probably all justified, depending on where we get those met. Otherwise, maybe we don't need that particular one, or are not aware of that particular one from nature.
Could I just suggest, this is picking up on something that was said this morning, and it's not academic, an appreciation for the history of Earth. There are many times in Earth's history where nature led to or created massive destruction. There's one event in particular, only 3% of life got through. 3%. That's nature.
Yeah,
I didn't hear that.
On a time in Earth's history where only 3% of life made it through a mass extinction. That's nature.
65 million years. So.
No, that was
225.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, is that one?
Yeah.
That's how, that is nature. You may look at that and say, how terrible that something happened that 97% of all life on Earth died in geologic time like that. But that's nature.
I think there's two things going on here. This view of nature, and I think Baird's presentation this morning was trying to precisely bring into the conversation this ecosystem's sensibility of discordant harmonies, Watkins or other people, that nature as a romanticized notion is not, I think, the common assumption, certainly in this room, but I think it's something that definitely needs to be addressed in a whole variety of ways, from evolutionary biology to ecosystems biology. But I think what's really interesting about this discussion as well, because I share, as someone who studies Asia and has been in most parts of Asia for 30 years and has anticipated, as most scholars of Asia have, what will happen as China and India stand up. And to me, it's incontrovertible that is going to be, that's the climate change issue, if you will, modernization and so on. So I am completely with you in these regards. And I think there needs to be the ways in which this discussion of the tremendous impact of whatever disconnects we've had personally, whether in the West or elsewhere, because I think these are now universal issues. I'm not saying essentialist, but I'm saying they are global issues. That this profound sensibility of going from 2 billion to 6 billion people in 1 century and what our presence is on the planet has shaken the foundations of every. Why is it we're saying over and over again, these are existential questions? What are we? Are we partners? For everyone, these are questions. And I can tell you the Chinese are not out of this question. And they are trying to figure out, can they bring back their Confucian roots, their Taoist roots, their Buddhist roots, to reconstruct what it means to be human in this new century with a very foreboding future. And that's where I think there's a tremendous link between the kinds of concerns that Mitch has, that you've articulated, and I love this discussion, and I really appreciate the presentations this morning. But I think that we also have to have in the back of our mind a ringing and singing sensibility about the 6 billion people on this planet and how they enter into this kind of discussion. Just sort of finally, I would suggest that if we take 1982, the World Charter for Nature that was adopted by the United Nations, all countries voting for it except the US, and say that charter that came out of the sensibilities of the enormous reverence for ecosystems, that was a third world initiated document. But if we move to what Baird was calling for an earth ethics and so on, that I think many of us share the need for, if we take something like the Earth Charter that says this integrated sensibility has a primary focus on the integrity of of ecosystems. That's a primary. If those go down, everything goes down. But the integration of what you're talking about is the second big piece, is social economic justice. And without the integration of humans into these systems in some sustainable way, especially urban systems as well, and eco-design is moving in those directions. And the third piece is this democracy, nonviolence, and peace. That if you're working for the integrity of ecosystems, if you're considering social economic justice, and if you're trying to build institutions, democratic institutions which can actually protect and ensure this, I think we've got a different framework to address some of these kinds of questions. So I just wanted to put, I think this is a tremendously important point, not only of our views of nature, but of the larger global community issues.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. Aren't we all kind of circling around the realization that our relationship is dynamic? In other words, we can, we have an effect on what we're describing, our setting or our fabric or the context in which we live. And that context, our setting, has an effect on us. Without, then we can go in and say later on that, yeah, this is a good one, that's a good effect, that's a negative effect, whatever. We can sort of add values to that if we decide to do that as a group or as individually. But I think we're all circling around this notion that we have this dynamic relationship, that if we can affect this thing that we're describing as our setting, and that setting can affect us, good and bad, and then we can sort of superimpose upon that some sort of notions of economic justice, even social justice on that.
The eroding of the Asian ecosystems in 30 years, since I've been back and forth there, and what you're referring to is, I think, one of the most unbelievable things that happened in the 20th century, which we are only going to begin to understand the consequences of, because 2/3 of the world's peoples live there. And when the Yellow Sea isn't reaching the river, and when water is simply not possible to even get to people, there are now 94,000 protests a year in China alone about environmental issues and upheaval.
How many?
94,000
Protests.
a year. Yep. I mean, this is why the scale of what we're dealing with it has to be part of our thinking.
In response to what Tony was just saying, though, I was hearing Susan's comment earlier on how trying to characterize the relationship. Is it reciprocal, a partnership? No way, because the scale of this other it's so much vaster than any one of us, and we're embedded in it. I'm a part of that, and that seems a piece of this as well. That is, yes, I affect it. It affects me, but ultimately, I seem to be a part of something that is much bigger than me, that can eat me, and ultimately will. And it's the dimension of wildness, not in a romantic sense, but the wild simply as that which is out of our control. It's not out of control, it's just out of our control. And that seems to be absolutely integral to what's bubbling in the room.
I tell you what, I think we came here hoping to learn from really you folks who have an amazing background, and your minds are amazing, and your credentials are really wonderful. And so we're really here to steal ideas. And what we want to steal is ways of communicating the depth of the problem. As much as I appreciate the philosophical discussion that goes on, I'm also hoping that in addition to the philosophy and the Jungian theories and all the other things that I probably don't even understand, because not as well educated as you folks, but we are storytellers, and we're hoping that if you can tell stories in a way that we can say, there's an idea. We have an audience of 40 million people worldwide. Our show is seen in the United States, but it's seen all over the world, particularly in China and all over Europe and all. And these are the people that we're trying to tell stories to. So I just ask you occasionally to come down out of the clouds and use some words that, well, Marilyn, she knows good. She was a teacher, but I don't know. I don't understand half these words. So I can't, poor little me. But if we're going to, get to our audience, occasionally talk in ways that we can then use that to talk to our audience about the magnitude of climate change and the magnitude of disconnect with nature and all that goes with it. That's our secret agenda.
And the secret, like you're suggesting, is in the simplicity. And I think I was trying to get at that, was suggesting, can we, in our immediate environment, our immediate experience, capture something of what is going on with us right now personally, being in an environment, not to romanticize Aspen or romanticize beauty, but just to be in connection, reconnected, in contact with our immediate environment and be able to talk about that as an authentic today, here, now experience. And while we can talk about Cambodia or other places and other experiences as story, it's not as much the immediate personal of what really relays something that is hard to describe, personal, frustrating to describe, but is authentic of here and now. But I think the simplicity of trying that or reaching for that is what will move people in the immediate room or immediate experience.
I feel like we keep trying to put nature out there, and then I see people like Mitch and David saying it's us, and that's what I believe. Like, that's my connection with nature, is it to me, and it's so fundamental to how I think about it. The whole interbeing thing, it is me. It's not out there, and I know you're trying to say that we encapsulate in beauty, and I think we try to romanticize it. But when it comes back to it, it's us, it's our breath, it's our vibrations, it's our exchange of molecules. We are nature, and I can't get past that bit. So that kind of informs my understanding of it, but it's that fundamental to who we are. We keep wanting to separate it out there and save it. Do something about climate change, but it's doing something about us. That's how fundamental it is in my...
But that's you. I mean, the Christian ethic is that, man is separate from nature. Man controls nature. Man is to make nature behave the way you want it to. So it takes a while to get to where you are.
And maybe this is what Andrew's saying about, you can't have those essentialisms.
Right.
Sure.
I want to share something that happened to me yesterday. You walk through downtown Aspen and you just look around at the opulence and the vehicles and just the environment.
Kind of like a pet boutique myself.
And for me, a tremendous sense of some anger and shame about this country. It's not signing anything. It's reluctance to do anything. And yet it contributes so much to the problem. It's, we're not there yet where all of these billions of people have vehicles. We're still the major contributor to the problem. And there's just no sense of collective ownership or willingness. And especially when I meet with peoples from other parts of the world who are trying to do something in a collective way. Their nations are trying to do something. And the fact that we are just oblivious to this. And there's a real sense of shame around it.
But are we oblivious to it? When you talk to the person in the street, they know climate change is happening. They know climate change is happening, they're not oblivious to it.
But I think what
Powerless.
he's saying is our influence in the rest of the world, many people are oblivious to its full consequences. And I think that we are so unloved in the rest of the world. It is frightening right now as we know. But I mean, really frightening. Sad and frightening.
But it should be.
Yeah.
We should be unloved.
Absolutely.
I mean, this is disgusting.
I think even though people are aware of the problem of global warming, they don't really connect it internally. They don't really relate to it. I was hiking 2 weeks ago, and there's a mountain, Mount Antiro, and it's a beautiful 14er. You can climb up it. And I was very excited by this climb, and we went out there, and we happened to hit it on a weekend when a 4-wheel ATV group had moved in and were also going up this mountain. And it was, you know, whose perspective of nature is, is correct or right, or what's to say that they don't have a feeling for nature that's necessarily different from the one that I had. But certainly my experience of the event in time was very different because of their presence. There were lines of folks driving up this mountain. And we were sort of walking up in this beautiful area, and we get to the top, and there's almost like a picnic and a grill out, and folks up there doing their thing. You just sort of, it's a stark contrast how different people relate to nature, I think.
We were talking during lunch, and I forget who it was, we mentioned that we started to understand climate change when Katrina wiped out New Orleans. But then I'm reminded of the fact that in Bangladesh, for 4 months a year, 30 million people are displaced by the typhoons that whip through that lowland country. And so when they look at us and we're crying over New Orleans, I mean, it's incomprehensible to these people, absolutely incomprehensible.
Well, it was comprehensible. They sent assistance.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
There's just the numbers, the Pew does a very good job of tracking numbers on climate change. And the last survey they did was in July. I'll actually put this up on Wednesday. But Americans were at the bottom of the list in terms of the number of people who say climate change is a serious problem that needs to be addressed. We're at the bottom of the list. We're below China. Right? It's like 28% of the population or something like that. So it's really quite bad. And Katrina, the spin on Katrina now, right? I mean, in New Orleans, on the ground, the dominant narrative is it was a technological problem, right? If only the levees had been high enough, we wouldn't have to worry. How we solve this problem is we build the levees higher, right? I mean, tons of people have gone down there with fantastic ideas about sustainable architecture, sustainable design, all kinds of things. It's all been put away, right? Because now it's just this technological problem. And this is one of the things that bugs me. I mean, actually, I'm a big fan of the Schellenberger-Nordhaus paper that was circulated, and I'll talk about that on Wednesday as well. But one of the things I think is quite unfair about that paper is they really hammer the fact that the environmental community has been so obsessed with technological solutions to climate change, right? And it's all just been about the technology. And they compared it at one point to the great moral stand, I mean, not in the sense of great is good, but the sort of the strong moral stand that the right marshaled against partial abortion. But I mean, these are two very different kinds of problems. And when you're faced with an administration which basically treats intelligent design with more respect than it does global climate change, right? At least Bush intelligent design says teach the debate, right? With climate change, it's just there aren't two sides to the issue. When you're faced with those kinds of problems, then it seems to me that that we've had to go through this very long period of sort of making the scientific and technological claim, and now it's time to figure out now what's going to actually make it concrete. Not just connect it to people, but get them to really think that there's a problem at all. And the forces against this are great. People who marshal bigger outlets in the media than you guys do. So, yeah.
When you were asking before too about a story, as Jungians, we're very much into stories, especially myths. And I think one of the myths that to me is most important, especially with a science background as well, is of Prometheus stealing the fire from the gods. And scientists especially have been able to figure out in many ways how nature works and the laws of the universe, if you will. And then we've been manipulating that for our advantage, some countries much more so than others. But one of the consequences are that you end up with tremendous slums and people disconnected from nature, but they're still going by the rules of nature. You have to have food, water, healthy environments, be protected from your enemies, which include predators and mosquitoes and that sort of stuff. So all these elements keep, natural forces keep coming upon us, and I think humans, you said that we can't affect this broad environment, but the global climate change shows that humans can affect life of just about every form of life on the planet. So we have put ourselves into the positions of the gods, but we don't have the wisdom. We don't have the wisdom to, I think, to first of all, almost work with our own species and tend to our own house and recognize our own human powers and how we have to limit that. That if we're going to take the power of saving lives by killing off mosquitoes and preventing malaria, then we have to assume the responsibility of limiting our populations and that sort of thing. I think these are all powers that are incumbent upon us to try to use wisely. And this is aside from the powers of nuclear warfare and that sort of thing. And I was talking to somebody this noon that we've never been in this kind of position before, probably when we had mutually assured destruction with atomic weapons. But that was a power that we tried to, that we were using defensively and out of fear. And now it's a much more difficult type of power that we're faced with, this power of the positive mother in a sense, that we love all the things that we've created, you know, the Hummers and the instant transportation, I mean the fast transportation, that sort of stuff. And it's the thought of having to give some of these wonderful things up that makes it difficult. And just kind of throw all the thoughts in one statement here. But the systems that we set up, these are human-created systems, and whether they're political, economic, social, whatever, but these things all have to be addressed as part of the environmental problem, if you will. And I am certainly very much an environmentalist, but I think unless we talk a lot about our responsibilities as a species and our human relationships and our empathy with other human beings, those people in Bombay and that sort of thing, it's a very incomplete picture.
I'd like to actually respond to your challenge, because I've been thinking about it ever since you made it. You made two challenges, essentially. One was you related your experiences in various places around the world that are centers of unspeakable suffering, which is a very profound challenge to make, and one that I just can't possibly respond to without actually having had the same experience that you've had. But because you've had that experience, it is incumbent upon you to explain it. you can't get the explanations from us. That's the first part of it. I have more I want to say about that too. And that is that those places of unspeakable suffering are really right here too. I mean, they are in these opulent homes. They just take a different form. You ride the train between New York and Philadelphia. There are entire sections of communities that are completely dislocated. You don't have to travel to those places, although obviously, you know, it's really worthwhile to do so. And it's almost impossible to respond other than how you deal with the specifics of your own community. I mean, I want to go a little further and then respond to your second challenge. I flew here from Manchester, New Hampshire, and I come out of rural northern New England, which is pretty poor. There are places in Maine where I'm working now that people really struggle to make a living on a daily basis. You can really barely afford to make ends meet. And then you get in the airplane in Manchester and you enter this police state. You do. You know, and I haven't chosen to have a TV over the last month or so, despite my great love of the New York Mets, because I wanted to see what the world would look like without it for a while. You forget about a lot of these things. You just see what's right in front of you. You try to deal with it. All these people trying to eke out a living. And the same egregious distributions of wealth. If you go to the coast, you go to Camden, you go to Belfast. There are a lot of people with lots of wealth, and you just go 10 or 15 miles inland and you've got rural Appalachia. I don't understand it. I observe it, I just don't get it. It makes you want to, turns you into a socialist. At some level, you know, if parents were right. And I get in the plane, and it's this police state. I feel like I've walked into a science fiction movie. But then I sit next to people who may have completely different values than me, but they're good people. And you have discussions with them, and they have a lot of common sense, even though they've never seen what you've seen. Or maybe it's been in front of them, but they haven't cared to notice. And I find that very confusing, too. How could these people with such good impulses not be aware or awake of these egregious distributional challenges that create so much suffering? I don't have an answer for it. You asked what it felt like to come here, what it feels like to be here. I go up and down 3 times in the airplane, and I wonder, well, how come I'm looking out the window just totally overwhelmed and fear. I fly a lot, but I'm terrified of it. But I just put the fear aside and say, whoa, Darwin would have given his life to go up in the air like I'm going up in the air. And I get to see all these weather systems and just get blown away at it. And I look around the plane and no one else is looking out the window. I don't get it, I don't understand it, but that's the reality. And then I land here. I don't even know how I got here, in these enclosed silver containers that are zipping me through the air. And I look at these trophy homes on the hillside, and that have probably only been here for 10 years, right? They're so new on the landscape that it's just unfathomable, and I can't make any sense out of it. I'm just telling you, I can't. So I can only respond by trying to figure out what my voice is for creative change, and where I wound up in my life, and how I can best deal with that. That's all I can say about it. And I think about your challenge, and I think, whoa, how can I get the kids at Unity College to be more aware of this? What kinds of exchanges? You know, at Unity, instead of having a spring term in Italy, although I guess we've had one of those, they went down to Katrina to work with the hurricane victims. Can't quite send them to Bangladesh, but there are plenty of places they can go right around here. There are plenty of places they can go in their own community. So it feels weird to me in Aspen, actually. I mean, the mountains are beautiful, but I don't even know how I got here, and I don't even know what I'm doing here. I really don't, but I'm here, nonetheless. The second challenge is really interesting to me, too, because the second challenge was a kind of, well, there's a lot of complicated philosophical and psychological discussion going on, and I think maybe this is not quite fair, but you intimated that, or maybe I'm projecting some of my own feelings about it and blaming you, Hal, but you intimated that it was, I think, this isn't your term, almost masturbatory in a sense. And I don't think that's too unfair. You know, and I sort of understand that, but, and that you asked us to create a more simple language in a way. And I think that I don't know how to respond to that one either, in a sense, because everyone works at this at their own pace. So for some people, it is figuring out this bigger relationship as their essence in the world and who they are. And others don't have any patience for that at all, because they haven't seen what you've seen, and they just want to get right to work right now. And I just think, once again, you've got to find whichever voice fits you and try to find some way of making that work. And I'm very challenged by your comments, because it makes me realize that I don't know shit. You know, really, I don't mean to be gratuitous in that regard. It makes me realize. That's like when I was writing a book about global environmental change from my little house in New Hampshire. You know, in this park, really, is what it is. And then I fly to Mexico City, where I'd never been. I had no idea what Mexico was like. I thought Mexico was the Three Amigos. I did. I had no idea. And I fly to Mexico City, and it's like, holy shit, this place is bigger than Los Angeles. It's just vast, and it's all, I mean, it's mainly lower middle class. It was so big, and then you drive out to the butterfly sanctuary where we all went, you know, to see the monarchs, and it was worse than the New Jersey Turnpike. I mean, it was just miles and miles and miles and miles of industrialization. And I felt like a fraud writing a book about global environmental change. I really did. Now, I just, you know, go ahead and do it anyway, because I'm speaking to an audience, including myself, that needs to begin to understand how these things work, but it still felt kind of fraudulent in a way. So I guess I'm just revealing some things, and I have nothing left to say.
It's, you know, all you have to do is practice talking to people in a different way sometimes. You know, we interview the marquee names in the environmental movement. And the reason that they're the marquee names is that somehow or another they've been able to, in a few short paragraphs, say everything that you know, and everybody else, but they put it together in a way that Carl said, now probably put together, but you know, that's why we gravitate to people like Lester Brown and Tom Lovejoy, and the Homer Dixon out of Toronto, who's absolutely amazing. Or
why would we want to do this? Why would we want to learn?
Well, yeah, but if you do that, then because it would be good for. No, it could help. It could help clue the rest of the world into the knowledge that you have that is so important. That's all I'm saying.
But how it might be that there are a lot of voices in the room that actually that are doing that and that have an eloquence that is all their own and quite unique and strange, but it just takes the tuning of the ear and the heart to each of these other peculiar ways of speaking. But there, I mean, I only know a few people here, but
I know
they're pretty amazing in terms of their ability to communicate across outrageous boundaries and differences.
We always have to worry about our audience that goes, and they're gone. We've lost them. They won't come back. So
we're a cell line that, in my understanding, we took on a rather different adventure. We're a cell line that chose this soma form to give rise to this incredible complexity of brain.
Here comes
we chose to die.
Look out.
We chose to die. So somehow or other, this capacity for body and this capacity for whatever it is we call thought, they're not two different things. And that capacity sits in all these shitty places, Hal. I don't care. You're playing this game with us like, oh, I don't know, come on. You're here, Hal, you're a very intelligent person. Don't be giving me this game. This capacity for incredible creativity is there too. So don't rub my face in some kind of romanticism. These people have a romance also. There's a romance. They fall in love in those places, Al. Hey.
Yes, they do.
Hey, I just wonder why. I don't disagree with what you said and what we said.
I don't care whether you agree or disagree.
But I just wonder why all of this shit has gotten dumped on him.
It hasn't.
I mean, I think he is raising something, and we can agree or not, but I think he was raising something, and our response to it really intrigues me.
I don't see him. I think his challenge has been acknowledged and honored.
I don't see any shit dumped on it.
I mean, that's what I try to do.
Well, yeah, I thought the way that you, yeah.
But I think it's been acknowledged and honored. It was a riveting challenge. There was a stylistic aspect of it that we needed to deal with, and I think we have. But I think that he brought us back to a certain type of reality that we need to confront. That's very, very difficult.
Yeah.
In my language, I would say what he brought in was the shadow. I mean, I'm speaking as a young shadow. And when the shadow comes in, whether it's stylistic or not, it is a challenge we've got to deal with.
Right, it is. It is.
I thought the way Mitch responded to it was pretty shadowy in its own way. And but that wasn't in any way dumping on Al. It was rising and meeting him in kind. That feels honoring to me.
I don't feel dumped.
I completely support what he said.
Okay, well then, let me just step.
Now we're dumping
on you. Maybe dumping is not the right word. What I'm interested in is
just silly human speaking words.
Yeah. Maybe I got caught up like a metaphor of shit. What really impresses me is that we've gotten a conversation going that has really gotten down to a very deep level here. So the challenge has really brought in something that maybe has been staying outside for a while. And that is good. That's what I'm really trying to say. And I just want to add to that your remarks, I have the same feeling that you do. I mean, I'm sitting here listening to what you're saying about the Asian biosphere or the internet, and I'm sitting here thinking, everything that I know, everything that I'm passionate about, everything that I write about, seems to be silly in relation to that overwhelming fact. And it makes me feel powerless. And that's another shadow that I think has been outside the room. How do we, in our conversation, speak to the people in power? It's not that we're oblivious. I think you used the word before, we feel powerless sometimes. Or maybe I'm only speaking for myself. But I think what you raised, I think the stakes are so high that at times I feel like throwing up my hands. And that was the question that came out at lunch. And that was the question about despair, because you raised it. You said sometimes you feel passion and despair. And I would like to know how all of us in this room deal with the overwhelming crisis that faces us without falling into despair.
That's what I heard Melanie say is, people know about it, they actually get a sense, whether they understand it with all the empirical data and knowledge that you bring, people get that somewhere. And, the overwhelming responses that they feel overwhelmed, that they just don't know what the hell they could possibly do, and that's when you get the numbing, that's when you get the shutting down, that's when you get people turning off and flipping the channel, whatever it is, turning off.
I think that's true, except, as Andrew said, there's, according to the Pew Research that just came out, 80% of people may know that there's climate change, but only 28% or so, which is a small number, believe that it's serious and something has to be done.
Because it implies responsibility. If you think this is a
serious
issue,
no, it's because they're being told that they don't have to worry about it.
Yeah. Right.
By some very, very powerful people, who are also telling them that they need to be really worried about terrorism, and they're believing it because the state really matters.
But I think the middle ground between this exceedingly important point, Bob, that you're raising, and it's been raised by others, of despair and hope, or the foreboding and possibility, is it lies in this sense of who we are as humans, and it lies in this sense of how we're going to have short-term possible change with long-term connection to our evolutionary history and our evolutionary future. And when Gary Snyder came in just before the elections at Black Oak Bookstore, and people were like, Gary's new book and stuff, and Gary, what do you think? What do you think? And what's going to happen with the election? I mean, first of all, I just want to preface by saying, as a Chinese historian and so on, the Bush administration is a blip in the imperial reign. And we've got to think through a politics that has left a death cloud over us, and we've got to think beyond it. And what Gary Snyder says was exactly to that point. And he says, I'm working on the forest in the Sierras for the next 1,000 years. And it's that kind of thinking that we've got to come into our being with, and that's why this discussion and what you have said and what you've said, Susie and Steve, and so on, matters hugely, because we have to put it into our biohistorical beings. We have to encode who we are, and that's the long-term thinking that's going to really get us through what E.O. Wilson calls the hourglass, because we're in the hourglass right now of huge extinction, of huge loss. And the loss is right here along with that wall.
Yeah, I hear some evangelical thinkers now echoing Mary Evelyn's this kind of concern where they're on board with the climate change issue, but what gives them, or what really gives them their commitment is social justice issues. The poor will suffer. That's why they're committed to this, this long-term commitment you're talking about.
Can I interject? I've heard it said the other way as well.
My hand's the highest.
You trumped those.
Has anybody had enough for us invites? There's a really nice dinner waiting for us, and the show's ready. Yeah.